Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. My name is Samantha Becker, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the November 2018 episode of Shaping EDU Live. For all you dreamers, doers, and drivers, here's how today's event is going to go. Joining us are several panelists who have expertise in today's theme. Collectively, they represent a range of roles in shaping the future of education. And in just a moment, they'll be introducing themselves. And I will say this exactly one time, but if you have not yet voted and you're in the US, you are excused because the session will be recorded, so you are excused to do your civic duty if now is the only window that you have for voting. That is all. Okay, we will jump in. So while the chat is available for free-flowing discussions, we also encourage you to tweet along with the hashtag #ShapingEDU. As a practical matter, I'll just ask everyone in the audience to keep themselves muted unless speaking. If you have a question at any point, feel free to raise your hand, both figuratively and literally, or ask your question in the chat. The wonderful and talented Karina Branson of Conversketch is here with us today, and she'll be live sketching this discussion. So that's what you're kind of seeing up on your screen here now. Okay, so time to dive in. Thank you all so much for joining us today for what will be an informal and informative discussion about recognizing all forms of learning. We know learning happens anytime and anywhere. Of course, the internet and all of our various digital and social media tools especially enables that. Learning experiences often take place on the peripheries of formal courses and classes. And unfortunately, many traditional degree programs and school programs don't capture or reflect the full breadth of learning. So before we dive in, I'll give you this one quick example. So Sabrina is 29 years old. She has a dual undergraduate degree in sociology and communications and has been working as a social media manager for 2 years at a growing startup. Her work increasingly calls for her to upskill in areas like digital storytelling, which involves the production of short videos, infographics, maybe digital flyers, and more. To meet the demands of this role and nurture her skill set, Sabrina has watched, just like me, countless hours of YouTube videos, as well as engaging in other resources to teach herself graphic design. She is now a proficient user of Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop. She single-handedly produced 2 videos in iMovie that went viral for all the right reasons. She just found out a comms director position is opened at her company, but a master's is required for this job. Never one to feel defeated, Sabrina immediately begins exploring master's programs. Unfortunately, in the initial 3 hours she spends researching, it looks like she'll need to start from scratch, taking classes at a skill level she has already attained on the job. That is, if she gets accepted to the master's program. So there are many directions we can take a conversation about the scenario. One could say that our company should relax their requirements and allow someone who can demonstrate specific skills. One could also say that all master's programs should encompass earned admission strategies, like those seen at ASU. Or one might say it's time for the prospect of micro-learning experiences and micro-credentials to enter mainstream. But from this fictitious scenario, we move to our present reality. I'm joined today by several panelists who are subject matter experts who will have great perspective to share about how we could better recognize learning whenever, wherever, and however it takes place. So at this point, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce yourselves, and we'll start with you, Rowan. And you may be on mute, Rowan.
Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Sam. My name is Rowan de Faria. I am the director for Herberger Online Learning at the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts at ASU. And as such, I am managing a small group of instructional designers, learning designers, developers. And our mission, our purpose is to support our academic units and advance learning strategy for our dean's initiatives. And in a nutshell, really what we are interested in, what we are trying to advance, what we're trying to do better, and what we're trying to put forward is how we can provide a learning pathways that will address and put back the power to the learner, and that will promote learning at the intersection of fields. That's one area, and the other area is how do we engage the community in learning, and how do we look at learning and redefine, and this is all in alignment with some of the larger goals that are happening with our leadership, but how do we prepare the creative artist to have impact in the world? So the traditional way of, let's say, measuring what is successful once you complete an education or complete one part in the journey has been shifted more towards, well, what kind of impact can the learner have in the world? So how we do that, that's a central question for us. That's what we are interested in advancing. It's also, what we're in dialogue with other folks, some of which are probably on this panel, in terms of how do we move into the future to continue to empowering the learner in those ways.
Thank you, Rowan. We're so pleased that you are able to join us here today.
Good to be here.
Lisa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello. I'm Lisa Gustinelli, and I'm delighted to be here with everyone. And I guess you would say I'm the kind of eclectic person who goes all across curriculum from K all the way through community college and then university. In my capacity as Director of Instructional Technology for a K-12 school, but then also as an adjunct professor at Florida Atlantic University teaching the EME 2040 course, which is the course that new teachers have to take to learn about integrating technology. And because I see the big picture, it's really important, and especially these are young students just starting out hoping to be teachers, the ones that I teach at the university, that the students coming in, we need to know, where did they come from? Like, we have to recognize what is happening from K through 6, what's happening from 6 through 12 before they even get to the university level, because teachers who are seasoned teachers are kind of in shock because they don't, it's not even I don't think it's about the technology. A lot of them say, oh, we don't know how to do this technology. No, we just have a different kind of learner. We have a different kind of student that we had before. And I try to even explain to the young people at the university that you have to reach them in different ways than even the way that you were educated. I mean, there was a saying always that, you teach the way you learned. You're the type of teacher and you teach the way it was for you in a classroom. But that's just not true anymore. And we've seen, I can give some examples, like at the high school level, students in an engineering class partnering with a large company, people who are software engineers at LexisNexis. So they come in, and I had them come in and they worked with the students, and then the students can actually see, oh, this is why you use this coding. You're using it to fight terrorism because you're writing the code that's going to connect on different levels, different people across society. So they're learning through mentorship, which is really important. And that's a different type of learning than the traditional learning. Service learning is a big one too. Students get a different perspective on things when they actually go out and they help the people. I promise I'm not political at all, but here's today's election day. So if somebody's interested in political science, yeah, they need to know all the background and theory, but what if they actually got out and really we're in the trenches with people who are forming laws and things like that. So it's really important for us when we're talking about these recognizing forms of learning to remember and go back all the way to the beginning. And Samantha has a little girl. I know she does. So you already see that she's doing and learning in different ways than, you know, children learned even 5 years ago. So that's kind of my message for tonight. And you know, there's different examples of different ways we can reach different students with different forms of learning. But hopefully that will be a big part of the discussion tonight.
Thanks, Lisa, and you certainly add a valuable perspective. And so thank you so much for sharing, and we're so pleased that you're with us today. Tracy, over to you. Tracy, you might be on mute.
Sorry, didn't click. Sorry, wasting time. Hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Petrillo. I am currently in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and I also have a little bit of an eclectic thought process to the group tonight. I'm Chief Learning Officer for the Construction Specifications Institute, a professional membership society representing construction management professionals, and I'm past Chief Learning Officer for EDUCAUSE, representing higher ed and higher ed IT. I've been the CEO of an interprofessional medical society that offered a specialty fellowship leading to a board certification. And the roles that I do and the work that I do intersects adult learning between higher education, industry credentialing for lifelong learning, educational technology, and workforce. And I think my message tonight will be about how my work and experience connects lifelong learning to career competence. So, you know, the goal of adult learning, no matter who they're getting it from now, is really about, are we keeping people adept and competent in the job that they do? So I'm really, really about empowering the self-directed learning and how we can recognize that so people can change jobs, work in the gig economy, or keep one job for 30 years if that's even possible anymore. So thanks for having me on this panel.
Tracy, we're so glad you're with us today. Thank you. Over to you, Meredith.
Hi, everybody. I'm Meredith Toth, Assistant Dean for Digital Learning with the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. We are a college of education that delivers education programs across all 4 of the university's campuses and online. Online is over half of our college's enrollment for good cause. When we think about the education profession, we tend to think traditionally about teacher preparation, and our college is making great strides to help redefine what it means to be an educator, to broaden that term to be far more encompassing, and to help others within the university, outside the university, think about what people gain by having an education degree outside of the traditional classroom K-12 modality that we tend to think about. So we're working to prepare people to work in a number of different education contexts, including classrooms, but not constrained by that. And as part of that, it is increasingly important to us that we think about how we both prepare people to go into a professional practice and how we can acknowledge and recognize the skills and the knowledge that people come to us with, either through formal training programs, through experiences they've had in jobs, and what we can do to be responsive to what they already know and identify the additional learning and expertise that they need to gain while they're with us, instead of just reteaching something that they already have. And we're also interested, just in general because of the market, in terms of where education is in our society, in helping decrease costs to those pathways for education professionals, so that we might be able to decrease the cost towards a bachelor's degree or towards a master's degree by essentially figuring out whether or not we can give credit for past experiences and past knowledge. So a lot of really interesting things for us to think about. and how to formally bridge this traditionally not for credit and for credit space so that we can have continuous learning experiences before they come to the university environment and continuing in parallel and then after they leave.
Sabrina would be grateful. Thank you, Meredith. Over to you, David.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I'm David. I'm from Spain. I'm in Spain now, so I'm quite far from there. Here is night, and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Samantha, for everything. So I work as a project manager in a small company here in Spain, and we work with a lot of schools and a lot of teachers that, well, they feel a little bit lost in this environment, in these changes that we are experiencing, and we help them to improve their learning experience that they want to deliver to the students. So since we have new kind of students that are facing a new world that is changing, we help the teachers to adapt to this environment and provide them the best learning experience. We face the learning as an experience, and we want to help the teachers to do the best in their lessons, but also taking into account all the ways of learning that they will find. So that's more or less what we do.
So happy to have you here today, Dave, and thanks for staying up late with us. We appreciate it. And then, of course, our honorary panelist, Karina Branson, the responsible for the beautiful artwork you see in front of you.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much. I'm just delighted to continue to be a part of these conversations. I'm going to be doing my best to listen to the nuggets of wisdom and inspiration you share and capture them using these hand-drawn images and words that are yours. So this will be available online afterwards, and you'll probably just see my forehead or my hand on my forehead as I have my screen flat to be drawing on it. But I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to listening. Thanks, Sam.
No problem. So glad that everyone has joined us today. And the first question that I have for panelists, and audience, please feel free to chime in with others, is what are some emerging ways and tools that you guys are using or experiencing in your environments for recognizing non-traditional learning, whether it's informal learning or really any kind of learning?
Okay. One really popular one, of course, is when working with faculty and then teachers, I've created online tutorials that are linked to digital badges because, as we know, they really, even adults enjoy being able to be recognized for the hard work that they've put in. And also, it also keeps a really good record for them as to what they've done and what they've completed. It's right there for them.
Lots of momentum around digital badges these days, and certainly there's a lot of schools of thoughts on them about how there needs to be focused efforts between both industry and institutions and schools, and industry, of course, to recognize the value of those badges. But any other panelists care to comment about digital badges as a emergent practice for recognizing learning?
I think that it holds a tremendous amount of promise, but more in particular, the way we look at it is if we have an ecosystem of many different paths, it will promote learning that occurs in a way that is not always, right now at least, possible. So when we look at it, we are engaged in trying to bring artists and creative artists to a place that they're ready to go into the world and have impact in the world. So when we are looking at what do we need to do, what do we need to advance to be effective in that way, we have to look at what everybody's talking about in terms of the gap between, what is the university offering right now in terms of degrees and what is the market wanting. So there is that gap, and I think that has a lot of power to be addressed, and I think higher ed is uniquely positioned for it. But I think it also goes somewhat beyond that, in that for us in the creative arts, the definition of what is needed in the marketplace is a little bit fuzzier. The data is fuzzier, everything is a little bit fuzzier. So we have an additional challenge. But it is, I think, a primary way of providing another form of power to education and closing that gap. And once that gap is closed, it will also open up possibilities for what academic institutions, higher ed institutions need to continue and do well, because we're looking at the nuts and bolts of, okay, we prepare a user, a learner to be successful in the marketplace. If that can be done in a straight line effectively and put at the power of the user, that will also enhance some of the other goals that higher institutions have that have to do more with evolutionizing a human being to be expressive and live to the fullest. And so I think there's a tremendous potential there. For us in the creative arts, we have to do two things: close the gap and find a way what the market wants, but also almost push out into the world, hey, listen, the creative artists, look what they can contribute to any venture in creative thoughts. That's still fuzzy, right? It's creative, it's changing, and people are talking about how important creativity is now, right? But it's a fairly new thing. And so it's coming more towards center, but it's still, for us, a challenge. And it's different for somebody if you ask a CEO, hey, in construction, he'll know exactly what is missing. You ask or what he wants, but for the arts, that is a challenge for us. And part of what we hope to be able to do is to create, at least from a digital learning strategy, to support some of the missions that our dean has, is to have a way of providing multiple pathways that will allow a designer to retool in one area or add skills that will allow them to engage in the world in new ways, but also that will allow folks out in the world, in the market, to see, wow, we need creative artists everywhere. Why didn't we have them all along? Why are we not looking at what we need in that arena? So I think it has power.
Yeah, I'm happy you said that, Rowan, because I was reading an article where someone was advocating to change the title of soft skills, like creativity and critical thinking, to power skills. And then someone else chimed in and said, how about essential skills? So it was really nice to see those conversations taking place. And that also is a great segue or another dimension to add to this conversation when we talk about recognizing all forms of learning. Certainly between disciplines, there are different expectations for knowledge and skill acquisition, but there are also skills that are transferable across all disciplines. And how are we doing a better job as institutions about making sure those skills are woven into every discipline and every program? So just something to noodle on as well.
And I would add, again, from the outcomes perspective, because I've worked in the professional landscape of keeping people, once they're in a profession, to maintain their certificate or credential or license throughout, is The words that are coming to beyond badging, I think we're all at a place now where badging isn't a fad, and we can assume that the digital badging, either the open standards that are becoming recognized, whether it's blockchain technology or whatever technology it is to recognize that part of learning digitally, is also going to feed into the need for the extended transcript, the comprehensive learner record, or the digital portfolio. And those words are kind of scary to the individual learner and to the employer, who is not yet prepared to look at something other than a flat resume that says, do I have X degree? Does that fill into the application, the job field where I'm filling in an application? So the recognition of all forms of learning creates this amazing patchwork quilt of the competencies that we need to succeed. However, we have to start to think about the value to the learner and the value to the employer, because if I can't read your patchwork quilt to find what's relevant for me when I hire you, we'll get lost. So as we think about this as the educators designing learning and designing badges, what are the outcomes that we really want that student to show on their portfolio, on their transcript, so those skills are transferable across disciplines, across professions, and really keep them up to date.
To add to that, Tracy, there were a couple points that I wanted to make, both at the micro and the macro level, but I'll make the macro one first to key off of what you're saying, which is that something that we've been thinking about is also how do we make this learning kind of time and space independent, right? So how can we allow somebody, at least in our field, who maybe at an initial stage is just interested in coming to a webinar, no commitment, I just want to learn something, I want to read through some material, and then I'm going to go apply it and work through it at my own pace. And maybe later I want to come back for the earning part of it, in terms of earning the badge and submitting the evidence and demonstrating that I have actually gained or can demonstrate that I've gained that skill. And so we've been thinking quite a bit about, we use the analogy of the airline model where different seats are sold at, the same seats are sold at different prices, right? So it may be that sometimes somebody just wants to come in and audit not in the way that we think of it in higher ed. And then some people may want a self-paced independent course, and some people maybe want something facilitated, and some people maybe want independent auditing, but then submit their own evidence. Some people may want to gain the learning completely independent. They have a mentor, they've picked up skills in their workplace, and all they want us to do is assess the evidence that they submit. And so this kind of mix and match model of separating what we have been calling the learning from the earning is really intriguing to us, so that we can parse it out and allow people that we aren't recreating a structured model that people have to follow that just redefines a new model but still has constraints all over it in terms of how many weeks the class is and how much time you have to complete it. So that's one part, I think, on the macro level. And then on the micro level, in terms of recognizing all forms of learning, I also want to mention, and this may be specific to education, but it may apply to other fields as well, in that we have worked very hard to think more openly about the contexts in which somebody may provide evidence of a skill, in the sense that they may be able to meet an outcome working in a software engineering company that does English language learning software. They may be able to provide evidence of that skill in a K-12 classroom, or they may be working in a library after school program, and that the context in which they're providing evidence and where that learning is taking place for the end learner may look very, very different than a predefined concept that oftentimes the person designing it has envisioned and is looking for that thing that looks exactly like that templated model. And that increasingly our learners are finding new ways to apply the knowledge and the skills, and that we need to be ready to recognize that and acknowledge it as well as meeting the criteria that we've outlined as saying that something provides evidence.
Well said. I'd love to hear from you, Lisa and or David, because I know that you offer a similar but also probably very different perspective.
Yeah, I wanted to add something about the main problem that we find here when we approach these kind of problems with educators, with teachers in K-12 mostly, is that they have to change their mindset. And this is the most difficult thing that we find, that they have to change the way they think about their students and the work that they have to do with them all together to develop all the skills instead of focusing in contents as they have done. So once they have made this change, it's easier to introduce concepts like portfolio or PLE, personal learning environment, and these kind of things that they are not used, and they feel that they are losing the control of what's happening in the learning process. So I think that this is the major obstacle that we find in this point. But like you said before, Tracy, Meredith also, there are a lot of solutions, technological solutions that are coming to help them. But the most important thing is, as I said before, is the changing the mindset. Once you have done it, technology will come to help. But if we have the technology, but we have not done this work with the teachers, with the educators, with the system, also with employers, we won't do anything.
Unfortunately, updating people's minds is a lot more difficult than updating operating systems. So, I mean, I would actually love more, more on the mindset.
It would be great if we can upgrade ourselves.
Let's upgrade ourselves. What do you think, Lisa?
Well, one thing, and I agree with everything everybody said, so interesting, but one thing we didn't mention about this whole idea of the digital badging that I think is really important when we're working with adult learners, college age, or even Tracy, your employee, the people are employed in the construction industry, is that with the digital badging, and Meredith, it kind of made me think of also what you were saying, is like people are really in control of how they learn and when they learn. I know, especially when introducing new types of styles of learning or new technologies, as adults, we don't want to fail. We tell kids that's the best way to learn is by failing. It's the best thing for you, but we pretend like we think it's a great thing, but we don't. So with being in control of earning our badge or earning our recognition, no matter, somebody sets parameters. Okay, this is what you have to do to earn this recognition, but you can do it on your own time with yourself. You can do it all wrong by yourself and try it again. Nobody's watching you. Nobody's criticizing you. If you didn't understand a part of it, you can go and investigate more or get support from the outside and still continue working, because in the end, it's kind of like, back in the day when we're, in education, you're talking about formative learning and summative learning. So you get to do all this formative, let's try it, let's see if we can do it. And then, the final culmination of that is that you earn this badge free of judgment and time constrictions on yourself, and you're doing it, and you're doing it to, not because it was imposed on you, but because you had a motivation to do this, to move forward in some type of way, whether you're a college student, towards a career, or if you're in a career and you just want to get more proficient at something to move up in a certain area.
Thank you, Lisa. And then a couple of really interesting questions have been surfaced by audience members. The first is about prior learning assessment, sort of a traditional term. Does PLA still have relevance here? Are you guys still using this as a model? Talk to me.
Well, I'll just go back to what I started a while before. The prior learning is that's too narrow, I think, because we want to know the human aspect of it, right? The soft skill of it, like who is the person, who is the learner, not just what skill does the learner have, but the entire, we have to be more holistic. And if we're going to recognize all the forms of learning, we have to be more holistic in looking at that learner.
So not just recognizing all forms of learning, but really recognizing our learners and seeing them as the unique individuals that they are.
Yeah, and I actually want to add to that because I agree with that. And I think I want to actually talk about 2 points. We talk about the power that an ecosystem can have. When we're talking about credentialing and micro-credentialing, and I always look at that, which is, of course, it's tremendous to be able to show credentialing and go through a path incrementally. But even looking at it more holistically, if you have a whole ecosystem, what it does to learning is of interest to me, and I'd be curious what other people on this panel or in the audience have to say about that, because we're not just looking at, in my opinion, a nuts and bolts approach of minimizing a gap of skills. We're looking also to empower a way of learning that, that empowers the user, in that addresses learning in a way that will move it also to the more holistic. And to your point, I think, Lisa, is that we have to start looking at especially in the digital domain, how we bring the more holistic approach into play. And so I think some of the movements that are happening need to go further. But if we're talking about micro-credentialing and learning path, it has to become an ecosystem. Why it's what I find exciting about it is that it promotes really a more holistic approach, if done right, between domains of knowledge. It also promotes, it empowers the user, and if it is done in an ecosystem that has all the different variables in place, namely a community, potentially mentors, I have access, and I have the ability to explore and discover totally new ways of where I want to go. So to a system in that, I think it's also important to say we have prescribed learning and assessments that give or augment the user to know and help where to go. But I think there's an exploratory aspect, and that exploratory aspect in conjunction with this makes this very interesting. And I think lastly, where can this go if we take it to a level and look at what else do we have to embed in this learning so that makes real world application. If we can have these skills, if we're talking about, hey, I have access and I acquire, let's say 50 skills, 50 competencies, right? I can hit off. But the other question I have for this panel then is that is more reductionist, right? So you could argue that this competency, if we become too reductionist, that would be anti-holistic that I was talking about. So on the one hand, it promotes cross-disciplinary and holistic movement, right? For lack of a better word. But on the other hand, it can also be reductionistic. And so the design of this, or how you put it together is really important. So from a learning strategy, more from a high level, we don't want to become too reductionistic. We want to have the straight path to give users skills, but we also want to have this applied in a real world or in some shape or form that has a holistic, more holistic face to it. That's just what comes to my mind when we're talking about this. What does that do to learning? But I would be curious to hear what other folks think about that.
I would add one comment about prior learning assessment, that I think it's evolving, and I think it's very relevant to competency-based education that we're going to see growth in. Because if we identify competencies, how can you determine what you already know and where your own gaps are? And that's one of the biggest challenges that our learners of today and tomorrow are going to need to assess, not only at the individual level for themselves growing in their career, changing careers and evolving careers, but also at the employer level. You know, the standard job description just doesn't cut it when you go out to hire people for different skill sets. It's one of the, what we don't know, we don't know. And to your point, Rowan, that you just made, I think the challenge that we're facing is we need to address personalized learning pathways while we hope that we're still able to create the recipe to get a student from point A to point B along the pathway that we design. But then to the point of the open university that's in the chat space going as well, is there only one pathway to learn what you need to learn? And that's my biggest fear, is we're very comfortable with a siloed approach. Many professions are very comfortable with the predictive approach to, these are the courses that we think you need and this is the pathway to achieve it. But what if there isn't only one way that works? And how do we let people move around from university to university? How do we let them create their own model of their best self for the workplace of tomorrow? We don't know how to demonstrate that yet in a very clean and concise way. So I think the challenge that I would offer to everyone would be, how can you do your part that the outcome for the learner is clear and concise? And, you know, because as we make it all muddier, we want the outcome to be as clean as it could be, not more complex, because complexity builds fear in learners. And we all know that fear is the biggest enemy to learning. It shuts down the interest, it shuts down the willingness, it shuts down the challenge. So how can we do, you know, really clear and concise end goals as we recognize learning? So that's just an inquiry of where we're all heading in our work.
Clear outcomes, less fear. I put that on a t-shirt and I'll wear it all day long. Thank you so much, Tracy. I love that. I do want to move on to another question from an audience member. Our own Lev Gonik pointed out a very prominent model. Where does the world of open universities fit into this narrative around multiple pathways for all learners? Are traditional institutions finally waking up to the world of open learning long established with open universities? Or is this really something new? Discuss. Thoughts on open universities and their models? Okay.
I can jump in, but so I'll acknowledge that this is not an area that I have a lot of knowledge about, but it feels like I'm not the only one since we're not all jumping in. But I've always actually been astonished in some ways, maybe not astonished at the fact that there is such a resistance to using something that's been designed by somebody else, right? So, I mean, Calculus 101, right? Like, it's not different. We're all teaching the same things across thousands of institutions, and yet, so I think I think it's fascinating to me that some of the open university, like, is there something so unique about the materials that are being offered that's different from any place else? That's one just kind of open question that I have. And then what would it take, perhaps a building step on this idea, is what would it take for our own institutions to break down some of the barriers that exist that make those materials not fluid, in the sense that why is it not possible for a student to go do the learning wherever they want through open university system, through a neighbor, through tutoring, whatever it is, and then through their own institution take the assessment, for example, at the end of our calculus class, and if they pass the high stakes assessment that most of our institutions use for these high enrollment classes, get credit for the class. So those, in terms of barriers, this has always been fascinating to me, that that we're not only requiring that the assessment be done with us, but we're requiring that the learning be done with us for some reason. And it seems to be a lot around the idea that our version or our method is unique, or that it has to be done with the people that we've authorized to teach our classes to make it count. So I would love to see some of those barriers come down. I don't want a free for all. I mean, that's the flip side, right? Complete, in a sense, democratization of learning. Like, there always feels like there needs to be some kind of regulation, but would the market regulate? I mean, this idea, if we really opened it up, is equally interesting to me. So that's just, I don't know if that's more building on what Lev was asking or taking it a different direction, but it's curious to me, and I'm interested to see how this can fit in and how we can build on some of the systems that have existed for some time, build on the successes and the opportunities rather than just trying to build something new.
I like that, Meredith, and it just reminds me of maybe some sort of exercise that that higher education and education can undertake. The American Alliance of Museums, I think it's the American Alliance of Museums, has been putting out these future scenarios. And, you know, so what if everything was completely open and democratized? What would, you know, how would institutions, you know, have the funding they need? How would students learn about the right opportunities that really suit what they're trying to do? So, I mean, it's an interesting scenario for this very community to kind of help think through. I want to also ask another question that came up in the audience that actually a really interesting conversation has ensued in the chat because of this. Tim has asked if our current teaching industry model could lead some of these changes by rethinking the way we certify and hire our teachers. Any comments about how we can better work with teachers and faculty and kind of set up support structures there that would then impact, you know, the way it trickles down to students?
I'd like to just give an example of that. In my back, when I first started, I was a teacher, I was a classroom teacher, and it was in a very elite private school. And so because of that, the teachers didn't have to be state certified. But that school purposely hired people who did not come from the teaching profession. For example, a former CEO of Tyco, his retirement job was that he was teaching mathematics at the school. So, okay, maybe he didn't go through all those teacher courses. He didn't have all the theory and everything, but boy, he had those students, you know, working on, you know, stock market and business and, you know, spreadsheets and things like that, that the school recognized that his skill set was greater than having been certified and taking, say, some kind of a math exam that he passed so that he could be a classroom teacher. And I think it's going to be really hard to get states onto that because they want to have a quality control, of course. But maybe somehow with this credentialing, there could be, just as there's alternate pathways to degrees, there could be alternate pathways to becoming a certified teacher, case in point, experience on the job that you could really enhance the class for the students with.
You know, we refer to ourselves always as lifelong learners. But then on the other token, on the other side of the token is we're lifelong teachers. And so what does that mean in the context of formalizing, certain skills that people bring to the table that maybe have never been formalized, before. So another very, very interesting thread. I know we're winding down in our time, but I really kind of want to continue this notion Lisa raised about exemplars and anecdotes, because I think the more concreteness we can kind of put around some of these fuzzy ideas, it's going to be really helpful for illuminating potential solutions. I'd love to hear from our panelists of any exemplars, be it in the micro-credentials, e-portfolio, badging, and any other space in terms of how you've seen all forms of learning successfully recognized. It doesn't have to be something that you're working on in your own environment. It could be another university, it could be a school, it could be something happening in the industry that we could potentially adapt and emulate.
Yeah, about the the certification of the teachers here in Europe, what we are experiencing is that the governments are making a real effort to offer more and more courses such as MOOCs or NOCs or nano courses, so the teachers can actualize their knowledge, their techniques to teach the technology that they can use in the classroom. And it's funny that the way to recognize this learning is with budgets. What is something really, really unusual here, because at the end, this is not official, so it won't be it won't be recognized when they want to get another job in another school or something like this. It's not something official, but the governments are offering this. So this is I think a sign that there is a changing coming, and that we will see in the next years.
I just want to point out something too, is that when we talk about recognizing all forms of learning, and of course we have our panelists, with the exception of Dave coming to us from Spain, the panelists are here in the US. I know there's a rampant issue across the world, especially in war-torn nations, as students are unable to get an education in their home countries because they're unable to get electricity or even running water. And U.S. governments and not U.S. governments, but governments and organizations around the world are looking to help solve this problem. I know the Malaysian government has showed strong, forms of support and is inviting any refugees from war-torn countries to Malaysia to seek a free education. And so when we talk about recognizing all forms of learning, we need to understand that learners are coming from all different backgrounds, all different countries. And so we're needing to not just think about innovative solutions in terms of what are the skill sets needed for the 21st century, but what does the 21st century learner really look like? There are still these major struggles that we have not adequately addressed, and the distribution of solutions is very uneven and unequal across the world. Okay, with that, we have 5 minutes left in our program, and so I just want to turn it over to the panelists just to wrap up with any concluding or final thoughts that you have based on the conversations we've had today. So the final word.
My final words are: don't create a badge for everything. I've learned that over working in the space for 5 years. It's not creating value. It's not creating relevance. So if you really create things that are going to build learner recognition, if there is that gaming approach to it, but if you're going to give a digital recognition of something that has learner value and employer value, really think through that process. And my other point that we don't have time for on this call, maybe a future call, is I do think the seat time and the credit hour will go away within our lifetime. Time is not personalized, and we're moving away from it. I don't know how it will all happen until it collapses, but I feel we're going there.
Mine would be a reminder to all of us, especially those of us, really, I suppose probably any of us who got where we are, but I think especially those of us who work in traditional American institutions of higher education, a reminder that we are not our learners, that our learners are not going to follow the same path that we did. They're not going to necessarily end up in the same jobs. They're not interested in the same kind of careers. And they're not going to learn the same way that perhaps we learn and the way that we like to learn. And yet we tend to design learning that way. And so I think it's just a constant reminder that we probably and should be talking with a much broader audience when we are thinking about how and what we're designing, so that we are truly thinking about our audience and their needs instead of our own.
My final word would be that we should proceed with a lot of humility. We should recognize that we don't have all the answers. I think we can be more successful if we're in partnership with learners, if we get a lot of feedback from learners, if we let the learners drive what's going on, and what we know will help them, and they know that, they can recognize that, but that really humility is the word, to know that we don't know all the answers. We're not sure exactly what's going to work, what's not going to work. We try different things. And then the other thing that I want to say is to also, and I approach it always like this, everybody has some kind of, and I'm not saying this to be a yoga person, but everybody has a unique talent. Everybody has something that they can give to our society. And so just to remember that when we're creating even these badges and things like that, that's why I was saying the holistic thing. How can we identify what that person's strength as a learner is and monopolize with that?
Well said. Rowan and Dave, Meredith?
So I will just piggyback on what you said. My last word would be, I find how I started actually. I find the possibility of micro-credentialing pathways incredible. I think it's very exciting, and I think we don't know. I agree. We have to proceed with humility. We don't know where it's going to go, and we really have to talk to really the learners. Meredith, I agree with that as well. But I think it's an incredible, exciting time because it is disruptive. A lot of things are changing. They're going to continue to change. In all of that, if we can find really the way to put put power to the learner in having agency over getting competencies at their fingertips, or fulfilling or getting skills in a way that micro-credentialing has a promise to do, I think that is a good thing. At the same time, I think let's find and continue to work on bringing humanity to the digital learning space in whatever way we can, in whatever way that looks like. That's a whole other discussion, I think. But I think there is I would say a bias in having a straight line thinking, and this bias is necessary and good, but we also need to bring in a more, for lack of a better word, circular thinking and a holistic approach that takes the affective domain into consideration, or holistically all aspects of the human being. And since digital learning cannot be separated from all other forms of learning. It requires, just like any other interaction in the world, the human touch. So it's a little nebulous, I know, but it is, I think, of major importance. So I want to, that will be my last word. I'll leave it at that.
The Shaping EDU community loves to wade through the nebulous and make things more tangible and concrete to move towards action. So that's perfect. Dave.
Okay, so to finish, well, I think that the most important, or the lesson that we can extract from here, is that to empower the learner, to help to change the mindsets, we have to recognize all the invisible learning that is happening, that we don't see, we don't recognize, we don't measure, but it's happening. So all this invisible learning, once we change the mindset, I think that we will have new glasses to find out what is happening in the minds of our students, and we will find that everything is wonderful and it's happening much more than what we think that it's happening. So more or less.
Excellent. Making the invisible visible. I love it. And then last but not least, Karina, the woman behind these fabulous drawings. You've been really absorbing it and then sharing it out with us in an artistic manner. Any closing thoughts before we conclude?
I'm going to zoom out here for you. I think that this is a really exciting space because as a practitioner, it's fantastic to hear people across the spectrum talking about how can we really make learning serve the learner. And I think something that has come out of other conversations with Shaping EDU Live is really listening to the students and including them in these conversations, the learners, the students. And so I'm really excited to hear that trend, along with examining the more holistic systems perspective. And I know that can be really challenging in institutions. So I encourage you to continue this network that's global, to keep pushing those boundaries and being disruptive. So thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much. The final thing I'll say before a couple closing remarks, because I know we're already at the end here, is that going back to the idea of micro-credentials and badges, this needs to be an ongoing and continuous discussion between industry and education, because we need to make sure that however we're recognizing our learners, that industry recognizes it too, because lots of people are trying to go back to upskill to get the promotion or to attain certain career goals. And so we need to make sure that when students leave our institutions, or that they never leave, they're always with us learning, but that whatever, whether it's a certificate or credential or badge, that it is recognized and endorsed really by employers as well. So with that, I'll say thank you to all the panelists and everyone for joining us today. It was certainly a vibrant discussion, and I can't wait to continue it in our online community. A really quick shameless plug before we leave. General registration for the 2019 Shaping EDU Unconference is opening November 12th. Registration will be first come, first served. We're capping participation at 200 people to keep the event intimately scaled and productive. But if you've signed up for any Shaping EDU events or our online community, you'll be among the first notified. There's also student inclusion piece, and we're majorly encouraging you guys to send students, and we can potentially offer some travel subsidies if your organization can't support students attending. The Unconference is taking place from March 11th to 13th in Tempe, Arizona. I really hope to see you there. And also the December edition of Shaping EDU Live is in the works, and the topic is perfect. It's actually personalizing learning, which we've actually kind of ended with a good segue towards that. And so you'll all receive information on that via email shortly. Thank you all again for tuning in today. Until next time, keep dreaming, doing, and driving. Thank you.